Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Natasha Briški. I would like to welcome you to the discussion on the topic of human rights and senior citizens. Human rights are one of the basic principles of modern Europe and are based on democracy and democratic values in the European Union and wider. And we can see efforts of various groups and legitimately elected officials which would like to ensure that certain basic human rights would be put away or would be completely eliminated on behalf of the national interests. We have to keep track of such things. We have to ensure that human rights are continued to be developed. Today's discussion is an international discussion within the project Human Rights in the 21st Century, because senior citizens are those who are often pushed to the edge. We will today discuss this topic. As a society, we tend to listen to their needs not often enough. The virus COVID-19 deepened this issue, and again we see that we have to pay more attention to the challenges the senior citizens are facing. Today's discussion will take place in the Slovenian language, partly in English as well, but we have simultaneous interpreting into English. So if you would like to speak in Slovenian, you can speak in Slovenian. And now I would like to ask Mr. Sebastian Pikl, the head of the Institute Novum, to take the floor. Mr. Pikl, you have the floor. Welcome. I will continue in English. My short introduction will be in English so that the wider audience can understand it as well.
So, hello, my name is Sebastian Pikl. I'm Managing Director of Institute Novum. Permit me to open this first discussion of a project and upcoming series of events titled Human Rights in 21st Century. This project was carefully constructed and structured last year by European Liberal Forum, Institute Novum, and several other political foundations across Europe. As already mentioned, human rights are a cornerstone of European integration and one of its fundamental values. And human rights are being challenged by changing political landscapes, by a rise of illiberal and populist political systems, and complex issues deriving out of technological progress, geostrategic interests, and most of all, climate change. And to add a recent challenge, public health issue, a coronavirus disease. So some of these concerns include right to privacy and freedom of expression in the digital age, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, migrations, and already, as I mentioned, climate change, which the issue climate change poses to life, food, and water. And of course, some others. So this two-year project, Human Rights in 21st Century, is going to gather and publish analysis, comments, data, reflections, and exchange opinions over its online hub, which is going to be on multiple social networks and online as a web page. And published articles and opinions are going to be from across Europe and beyond. So we strive to find and include as much knowledge, information, and data as we can get. So we are going to invite experts, academics, journalists, politicians, civil and government officials, and civil society to contribute and reflect on human rights. And today, I'm proud to announce the first public discussion in this series, Human Rights and Senior Citizens, which after some discussion, a group of organizers feels that contemporary political dynamics on top of the health emergency of coronavirus is putting a great stress on the elderly. Elderly already marginalized in public space, this health situation has only made the issue worse and exposed. And this became clear that we need to pay closer attention to this challenge which is coming with aging society. So my sincere thanks to all speakers for accepting our invitation despite the demanding situation. It looks like we are for some time going to need to accept this online digital reality. And I hope that even though that we are not live, we are going to be able to share some interesting thoughts which will contribute to the whole project. So thank you all. Thank you also to all out there who follow us via YouTube. And let us begin. Thank you.
Hvala lepa,
Thank you
Sebastian
very
Pikl,
much
torej
to
izvršni
Sebastian
direktor
Pikl,
Inštituta Novum.
so
Zdaj pa
executive
doktorica
director of the
Šarka
Institute
Prac,
of Novum,
predstavnica Evropskega
now Ms. Šarka
liberalnega
Prac,
foruma,
member of the
direktorica Inštituta
European
za politiko
Forum.
in družbo. Šarka Prac,
Šarka
member of the ELF, European Liberal Forum Board
Prac,
of
member of the
Directors,
ELF
and
Board
the
of
director
Directors.
of the Institute for Politics and Society. Please, the floor is yours.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to welcome you to this online roundtable about human rights and senior citizens on behalf of the European Liberal Forum. My name is Šárka Prac, and I am a board member of the European Liberal Forum and an executive director of the Czech think tank called Institute for Politics and Society. The European Liberal Forum is dedicated to respecting all human rights. Since its establishment in 2007, we have made it our mission to work through Europe in spreading liberal ideas and giving a voice to all citizens. Maintaining the rights of human beings is therefore a priority for the organization. These rights that we hold so close to the core of our organization were founded in 1950 with the creation of the Council of Europe. They were further elaborated in the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights, where the EU states have actively participated in protecting the basic rights of freedom, security, and justice. Although many challenges have impacted and influenced the degree to which these rights are respected, ELF urges countries to abide by the Charter for a more peaceful and liberal Europe. ELF stands alongside the EU in promoting human rights through liberal and democratic means, and we believe that we all have a role in protecting these universal human rights. Freedom is of the utmost importance, and ELF has made it its mission to use its platform to help both individuals and groups with maintaining these freedoms. From freedom of expression to freedom of education, movement, and life, all people without discrimination are deserving of these basic rights. We must always strive to defend these rights, and since its creation, ELF has continued to do its due diligence in promoting these rights. ELF has partnered with organizations that specialize on freedom, such as the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, the For Freedom for Liberal Thinking Foundation, and the Freedom Research Association in Turkey. Through these organizations and by itself, ELF has contributed in improving the dignity of Europeans by holding events for the LGBTQ+ community, giving voice to minorities, and establishing forums to safeguard human rights in the age of digitalization. Our basic freedoms may now be in jeopardy. However, COVID-19 has created social, economical, and political challenges that we haven't experienced before. Governmental measures are deemed to be violating our fundamental rights, as restrictions were placed on the 4 fundamental freedoms of the EU: freedom of goods, persons, services, and capital within the EU. Education is no longer equally accessible, and private data is no longer as protected as it once was. It's true that measures were necessary to maintain our right to health. However, politicians and leaders were able to use them to their advantage to gain power. We at ELF are concerned with these recent events, and therefore we have established online debates where experts and liberal thinkers are able to discuss and explore our rights and the actions and reactions that have been taken. Even before the rise of COVID, there have been violations of freedom of person, as seen with our senior citizens. The EU recognizes the right of senior citizens to live an independent life where they can participate both socially and culturally. However, the elderly have been marginalized, and concerns for their dignity should be readily discussed. Abuse, neglect, and exploitation all come from the violations of their human rights. It's a known fact that respect for their rights are lacking, and the EU must implement more measures in securing these basic rights. Throughout the years, the EU has taken some steps, such as ratifying the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and supporting organizations such as AGE Platform Europe. However, ELF urged the EU to lessen discrimination and continue to advance the rights of the elderly. We at ELF believe that respecting human rights is the first step in creating a more open and liberal Europe. The EU must continue to do its part in abiding by the treaties and conventions it ratifies. On behalf of the European Liberal Forum, allow me to wish you a pleasant debate, and I firmly believe that the fruitful discussion to which we are accustomed to during our events will be reflected in this virtual form.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Razpravo bomo nadaljevali.
We will continue the discussion after a video address of the Minister of Labor, Family, Social Affairs and Equal Opportunities. So we will give the floor to Janez Cigler-Kralj.
Lepo pozdravljeni.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Let me first of all wish you health and all the best in these unusual times in which we live. COVID-19 has completely changed our life habits and work. The work at our ministry at this time is mainly focused on the preparation and implementation of measures for the mitigation of COVID-19. Every day we monitor what is happening in the field of social care for the aged and other vulnerable groups, what is the situation in our social protection institutions, and of course what is happening in the labor market. One of our key concerns right now is the care of the elderly, who are the most at risk in this pandemic. It is up to all of us to protect them as much as possible. This is why we want to assist elderly homes as much as possible and to listen to them. We are in contact with them on a daily basis. We have strengthened them in terms of staff. We have provided them with compensation for the loss of income due to unoccupied capacities. We have devised teams that come to the elderly homes in case of a virus infection, and together with the directors, who must also have a contingency plan ready, we form red and gray zones in order to ensure that the spread of the virus is stopped as soon as possible. Until red zones are established, infected residents can be placed in designated hospitals. Let me emphasize in particular that in this second wave we did not close the elderly homes to visitors. Directors decide on this together with the epidemiologists and doctors based on the current situation. This is particularly important as restricting visits can cause severe mental distress to some, especially to the very helpless and sick residents. I can say that our elderly homes function well, that they try their best. Employees make many sacrifices, and I have to say that I'm very proud of them and would really like to thank them from the bottom of my heart for their hard work. The corona crisis has brought to the surface many problems in the field of care for the elderly, some of which have existed already for many years or even decades, which we have not solved in the past or haven't solved properly. Elderly homes are understaffed, standards and norms are insufficient, accommodation is in short supply, and in some cases the spatial conditions are poor or inadequate. Additionally, home help is not developed or is insufficiently developed. We have already started to tackle all these challenges at the Ministry of Labor and in the government. As already mentioned, we have already strengthened the elderly homes in terms of staff. We're preparing an investment plan for the construction of 5 homes. We are concluding tendering conditions for the awarding of licenses, which means an additional 1,100 accommodations in the public network. With European funds, we are carrying out the process of deinstitutionalizations and establishing community forms of residence for the elderly. Proposal for the Act on Long-Term Care and proposal for the National Demographic Fund Act have also been prepared, not only in the times of the coronavirus, but also otherwise. The position, importance, and the role of the elderly in the society are, for me, one of the most important topics at the Ministry of Labor, Family, Social Affairs and Equal Opportunities. Personally, I am very much in favor of intergenerational cooperation as it strengthens and enriches society. Solidarity and successful societies do not push the elderly to the margins, but include them by knowing that the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. If everyone sees only themselves and not their neighbor, we have died as a society. Therefore, special care has to be given to the elderly as a vulnerable group, but fast-growing group, both in our country and in the developed world. Namely, as long as a person lives, they want to be useful, because the basic need of everyone is to be seen and to be heard. The concern or desire of the elderly to be active for as long as possible and to live in their elderly homes for as long as possible is being expressed more and more loudly. Taking care of ourselves and others gives us all a sense of usefulness. It is up to us to decide how we will take care of the elderly and how compassionate we will be. Taking care of the elderly and intergenerational cooperation will continue to be my priority. First of all, as minister, I will work to improve the situation of all of us, especially of the most vulnerable in our society. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all the best.
Hvala lepa, gospod minister. Zdaj pa začenjamo
Thank you,
razpravo.
Minister, and now we will continue with the discussion. So we would like to know what the epidemics, which problems the epidemics showed in the field of senior citizens, how Sweden is facing these issues, and which solutions we should suggest. We have excellent guests with us, experts in various fields. Today with us we have the Mr. Micha Lobnik, the advocate of the principle of equality, Ms. Biserka Malal-Kmeden, social care expert and humanitarian, Jaka Bizjak, a former secretary of the Slovene Community of Social Institutions. And we are very pleased that Mr. Hans Wimberg was able to join us. He leads a private institute, a leading healthcare institute, and deals with establishing sustainable conditions for senior citizens. Mr. Wimberg, thank you for being part of this roundtable. About the experience in Sweden. And we look forward to hearing from you in Sweden. Unfortunately, I have to tell you that Mr. Peter Svetina was unable to join us today. the ombudsman. For various reasons, he was unable to attend, but maybe next time. So the first question, which will be the same for all of you, as I mentioned, COVID-19 showed many issues we have. Mr. Advocate Michalubnik, your team was very active. It found certain violations of human rights of the elderly. Can you summarize the violations? Welcome on my behalf as well. In the advocate of the principle of equality, we always pay attention that personal circumstances which we cannot influence, that these don't lead to unfair treatment or discrimination. And during the first crisis of COVID-19, we received larger numbers of consultations and individual cases of discrimination. Discrimination can rise because someone does this to someone else, or due to the fact that certain laws were adopted which create conditions which put a certain group outside of the scope. We saw that the stores were closing for people over the age of 65, and we evaluated this regulation, and we saw that the regulation was unjustified. If the stores were open only for people over the age of 65 for 2 hours, perhaps we should add another hour because it was only 2 hours. But the fact that it was prohibited for them to go to the stores in the spring, this was unjustified. We are very pleased now that the further measures the government foresaw, that the part when this will not be applicable at the moment. So we see that the crisis caused many challenges, especially to senior citizens or to people who have severe medical conditions. We are still working on the discrimination issues regarding the access to medical care during COVID-19, so access to hospitals, and these proceedings are still running. And because we are the administrative body in this procedure, I cannot comment on this issue, but we have started working on certain surveys and researches, and I can tell about this a bit later. Ms. Biserka Marolt-Meden, in your association, Silver Thread, perhaps in the last 7 months, what did you deal with the most? Which problems did you notice the most?
So the pandemic has shown all the problems from the last 2 decades in the field of elderly care. So already last year, when the revision of the court has been published, we've seen that for a decade now, the elderly care has not been sufficient, and all this has been exposed even more in the times of the pandemic now. We've also seen that there is a lack of the staff in the elderly home care institutions. We also don't have enough staff with the appropriate medical expertise. We would need 30% more staff in the medical care field. So from the 18th of March until today, we've written 20 public letters to the policy maker. I must say that Mr. Lobnik has addressed our letters first, especially concerning the slots for the shopping of elderly. And we saw that lots of rights of the elderly have been violated in terms of medical accessibility and so on. And I must say that this is one of the big problems in our society. We've also experienced that the social distancing has proven to be a big problem for the elderly. In Slovenia, no surveys, so to say, have been carried out in this time when the retirement homes have closed down. We all know that the elderly are not adapt to use all the top-notch technology that can connect them to their family, and we've also seen that the management was has not been connected to a sufficient level with the residents. All the findings, all the letters, I've had quite a few we've sent to the policymakers, and I must say that we haven't had any answers from them. So also the experts, the society and so on, all the discussions and answers in these concerns are very scarce. So not much has been done for the elderly. We've talked about that a lot, but we haven't had any activities. Thank you very much, Mr. Bizjak. So you've been in the management position of one of the elderly homes in Slovenia in this period. So what has been the most problematic in your opinion? I must say we've been quite lucky, so we haven't had problems in this concern. We've had problems with all different suggestions and recommendations of different institutions, and no one, at the end of the day, no one knew what to do, where to get the protective equipment, and what to do in case of serious events. But as Ms. Marold has already mentioned, COVID has unveiled lots of problems that we've been having for quite some time now. So lack of staff, also scarce scarce space, and it would have been, of course, easier if there were only one-bedrooms in the retirement homes, smaller groups, and so on. Also, there's been lots of misunderstandings on the part of the relatives as well as experts, because this was a one-off situation for everyone, of course. So thank you very much. Mr. Winberg is head of the leading healthcare institute in Sweden.
That you have a presentation ready, but before we start with that, could you speak a little bit about the difficulties and the challenges with that elders had in Sweden and are having in this time of the new coronavirus?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's an issue that is really close to my heart to work with this, and we've been working for a long time on especially the elderly. So I'm going to say a bit about the corona situation in Sweden and in regards to the elderly, with a fresh report that the Public Health Agency issued today, which was very good for me. And then I'm going to say a little bit about the elderly in the system and what we are doing. So as you know, this is in Sweden, but it's men and women, män, kvinnor. And this is the number of deaths per 1,000 inhabitants in Sweden. And as you can see, we were severely hit in the start. And the measures, I think that we already had gotten COVID into the country when we started to take precautions and do things. And there was, I wouldn't say panic, but almost panic, because it went very fast in the beginning. And as you see, the number of deaths is primarily at people that are 90 plus years old and 80 to 89. And if you go down to 70 to 79, there it's starting to rapidly decrease. And as you see, from the age of 50 and downwards, you cannot even see the statistics. But there have been, but the elderly in Sweden were severely hit. And the measures we took was to ask all 70 plus people in Sweden to, in fact, isolate themselves in their home. Now, we haven't had any lockdowns and the restrictions of that, because the public health agency in the Swedish government has followed sort of scientific protocols when it comes to public health measures. And Sweden didn't go for the surge where you close down schools and everything, and especially not schools, because we wanted to protect the children. And we know that if you close schools, situations in home will be worse for people with difficulties. And so we never went there. The schools were open all the time, but we closed all the elderly homes. We stopped the visits, and also people at home 70 plus, we urged them to, as you said, there were special hours in the shops. They shouldn't go out, and if they could, they should get their groceries from someone else. And this has led to a lot of problems. So what they issued today is that they also said that there will be no restrictions specifically for elderly people anymore. So the same restrictions that goes for all the people they are going to be the same. So we are no longer pointing out people 70 plus. And that's because we can see a wide range of negative effects of this close down for elderly, and the vulnerability and also mental unrest has risen. So we see that the negative effects even sometimes they surpass the benefits we had when it comes to deaths. And there's been lots of frustration, and also that we have stigmatized the elderly by pointing them out so clearly. And since you're not going out, you lose your social context, and as I said, the mental unrest has risen, and we have had increased calls to all helplines for suicides and for everything. So we can see that in the numbers, but there is all the signals are there. And we know that concern and anxiety has increased, especially with those who already have psychiatric diagnosis. And lots of the elderly people have that, because there's a sense of losing life in this. So I'm not going, but you know that in Sweden we have 3 levels. We have the national level, the regional level, and the local level. And the regional and local levels, they are self-supportive. So they do the taxing, and they are in charge of healthcare. So what the national level can do is only work through laws and guidelines and stuff like that. So we have regional and local parliaments. They are in charge of, and the regional parliaments are in charge of healthcare, and the local communities, local governments, they are in charge of the elderly care. And then we also have which has been a problem now, they can't hire doctors, but because that's only from the region. So they have to be able to work together. which they actually are not. So we've had problems with the elderly care already before COVID, but during COVID it was very, very obvious that we couldn't do that. For instance, when there was a shortage of supplies of protective equipment in the beginning, we saw to that the intensive care units, they got equipment, but we forgot the elderly care homes and stuff like that. And we also were very slow in issuing regulations for the people working with the elderly. And that's really punished. So going back to what we are talking about, human rights in this, we have actually 4 central core values that is in our health law. And it's to have generosity is that we should have everything almost for free. And it's an all-inclusive, all-included system. I mean, we really have what's that called? I lost that name, but we really have a universal healthcare in Sweden. And then we have, of course, efficiency, and that's actually written into the law because everyone knows that this can be very expensive. So there is a strive to actually balance costs from the beginning in the values, as the value that you should use your resources efficiently. Otherwise, you can't be generous because you can't have an all-inclusive system if you waste your resources. And then we all, of course, have quality and curiosity, and that's we should have the best possible care that is available today, which says that we should be innovative and we should actually look around and use the latest. So, and this is how it's been in Sweden. And this is the number of deaths at different ages, and you can see all through the 18th and 19th century that we used to die at birth. And it's after 1950, and especially 80s, 90s, and then you see that there is a huge shift, and then there's a prognosis 100 years forward from 2010 that you can see that the 100 plus are going to be. So we are actually seeing this very, very. It's very obvious now that the elderly population is really increasing, and we can also see that in healthcare in Sweden because we can see that roughly 3% of the patients in healthcare are actually consuming more than 50% of the cost of the resources. So 3% of the patient population uses 50% or more of the resources. And if we look how we have segmented care in Sweden, and I think globally, we have been obsessed, especially in Sweden, we are very obsessed with healthcare and especially hospital emergency acute care. That's the foundation of the Swedish system since late 18th century when we founded the hospital system. So, and that's, if you see, it's a defined process with an end. I mean, you come into a hospital, you have some kind of condition, and we either know what to do with it and then we can repair and fix it, or we don't know and you usually died. That's the logic of the system. Then as the medical evolution has gone, it's been more and more complex. We can do more and more things, which means that we tends to be very fragmented. And so the complicated procedure where you can't work within one single clinic, you need to combine. And that's something that we've been struggling with for the past 30 years, and you have lean processes and everything like that, and we're working with that mainly in the hospitals. But above the line, where it's not the linear process and there is no end, you have chronic and complex conditions, and these are actually new to the system because we are not rigged in that way. So the complex upper right corner, that's where we have 3% of the patient that actually consumes healthcare. And they are also the ones consuming care at care homes and at home, because we have a philosophy or a core value that people should stay in their own home for as long as possible, which is why we offer extensive help within the home. to elderly people. So what is happening now, because then it's not only about medical care, it's about social care, it's about health and not only sickness. So what we are seeing now in a transition that we are working with in Sweden called closed care is that we go from the organizational structures to relations, because these multi-sick people have lots of different actors around them that is supposed to help them. And they don't have the proper relations. We don't nurture the relations. And we should be proactive and preventive. So we are trying to scan elderly people just when they turn 75 is a very, very common, when problems are starting to build up, so that we can do something before they get really acute and critical. And we are trying to defragmentize and connect these different, and also use all patients and caretakers as active co-creators, which is very hard because the system isn't built that way. And try to look at health and not illness. And so being an economist from the Stockholm School of Economics, where leading healthcare has its foundation, we're an NGO foundation that does research and more action research to help policymakers in Sweden. You have to understand that the economy is more than money. It's about how we use the resources, and it becomes very clear when we talk about elderly people, because even in a rather extensive public system as we have for the elderly in Sweden, most of the work is done by the next of kids. It's the daughters, it's the brothers, the others, and the spouses that actually does most of the elderly care, even if we have very extensive elderly care in Sweden. So, and we have here a dilemma that our old acute emergency system, when we talk about efficiency there, we talk about clinical efficiency, and we don't see the effectiveness. What are the core values that we actually are going to reach for the elderly, and how do we make their life worthy and so that they don't have to go back and forth to the acute care emergency clinic like they do today. So we are trying to balance this, and that's why I say that economy is more than money, because economy is actually about values. And there the human rights values come right into this. So we have to sort of take a step back and rethink the system. What is it that we want to achieve? And especially now when I mean, it's only 30 years ago since, if you had a heart attack, the average length of life after that heart attack was 3.5 days in Sweden. We rarely have heart attacks today. It's very, very rare. We have preventive medicines. We can put in a stent just at the first examination, and so there has been enormous, tremendous development in medicine. And then if you add digitalization to that, you have two revolutions that actually are flipping healthcare. But we don't have the organizational adaptation. We still think that we should solve everything. Instead of looking at the human rights, we look at the rights of the procedures. So we have standardized ways of taking care of people, which doesn't fit the elderly. And it doesn't fit, I mean, if you have a rare disease or anything like that, you don't fit in the system anymore. But we try to sort of put the square box into the round hole, and we don't see that it breaks on the way. So these are some take-home messages from our research where we stand, and we have not reached this in Sweden either. So you don't have to be afraid that we should be very different in Czechoslovakia, in Czechia, or why did I say Czechoslovakia? Because I'm old. And Zorilla was a very good goalkeeper. He was actually a hero in Sweden. But this is what we are trying to achieve now, and you have to have your values right if you're going to change a system like this. So we should go for approximately right, because that's always better than being exactly wrong. Today we have too much administration and too much data collection that doesn't speak to any real activities. So we are only doing them, and that makes people really, that's one of the things that they feel that they lose the context, the meaning of life. And when we have extensive control systems, we almost always go for conformance and not performance. So we adhere to the rules, but it doesn't get better for the elderly because we don't have them in focus. And we need much more local data and not generalized indicators. So if you go to the EU and when they have indicators, we're drowned in indicators, but they don't say anything about how we actually take care of our elderly. And we have to start organize, not have just an organizational structure, but organizing the processes so that we can work around the patients. Structure always comes second, but we love to say that a reorganization is just rewriting the organizational scheme, which is not. It's when the work works better. That's when you do. And also, I think that, well, as you can hear, values are very important for me, that you can't optimize incoherent values. We need to have a value-based discussion. And then it's not values of performance measures of like how much do we get for a single euro. It's actually what are the values we want to promote? How do we want to treat our elderly? What kind of life do we want them to have? And you can't count on that. You have to balance different needs and balance values. And also universal models have a bad fit everywhere. So local context eats strategy for lunch. That's really important to know that you have to build in a system where you are aiming to take care of complex health issues that most of the elderly have today because they have several chronic diseases and other failures. How do you take care of each individual on the stage that they are so that they don't have to go too often to the hospital? They can get help at home, they can use digital technologies and everything. How do we see to do that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so basically what I'm saying is that we have a system and in Sweden, that's one of our basic problems. That system led us to be one of the best countries when it comes to healthcare in the world. Actually, we're on top of almost everything. Low deaths. I mean, you don't die at birth anymore. Then we have lots of those things that we are really good. But it's very hard to change a system that serves us well. But what we are seeing now with this new type of complex needs we don't take care of them with the old structures. We have to change, and that's really, really hard. And it's like this. This is an actual bridge in South America, but unfortunately the river turned. So it's a good bridge, but it's meaningless. It has no point. And that is what we have to do. And in that process, we need to keep a very close attention to that we preserve the values of giving the best for everyone and not go in for populism and stuff like that, where we make difference between different people and different geographical locations and different characteristics. So we have to speak a lot about the values when we try to help, especially the complex and critical groups, which the elderly is. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. You gave us quite a few talking points in Hvala lepa. Nadaljevala bi z vami,
continue with you, Mr. Michalubnik. I noticed that during his presentation, you were paying attention, a lot of attention. You nodded as well, especially when he talked about values. In your institution, you had an anonymous survey among senior citizens and their caretakers. What did the survey show you? I know that you do not have comprehensive results just yet. You have published a bit about it already, but what were the results? What is lacking? Thank you very much for this question. The survey was conducted at the start of summer, but in the beginning I would like to warn that it has not yet been completed, but we can talk about what we've learned from it already. So the first problem is how to hear the voice of people who are physically isolated, who we are unable to access because we can hurt them by doing so, because we could spread COVID. So we have more than 20,000 people living in elderly homes. In the end, we chose two paths. So one was the online survey. For many people, this was not optimal. And the second one was the semi-structured interviews with people who we could access. So we conceptualized the survey with 5 different groups. We had residents, we had family members, we had employees of these institutions, management, and the fifth one was the non-governmental organizations who keep track of this situation and have a lot of information on what's going on. The current data analysis shows us that at the moment we had the least numbers of participants among senior citizens. So this data is not representative, but point to the first line of information in the group of employees, or I should say relatives. We had 600 participants, which is an equal share. So we are talking about less than 1% of the population of residents. And employees, 427, 3.5% of all employees, and managers, 72 of 102. So we have more than 70% of coverage of all of them. And what did we want to ask them? So we wanted to ask them what happened to the information flow, what happened to the supportive services and protective measures, so what was the quality of healthcare, what was the quality of care and other social services, and how everything that happened influenced the privacy of residents, to their contacts, to their limitation of movement, and the protection of rights as well. From the people responding to the survey, 2/3 stated that during the crisis they felt worse or significantly worse than before. So this is a very important data, so that people who were able to participate have expressed this very openly and stated that the isolation caused problems in contacting their relatives. And in addition to their medical issues which they had, it was difficult for them to be in this process. They also estimated that it was much more difficult to access specialized medical care, physiotherapy, and work therapies as well. In general, they stated that in the beginning there were some issues with the protective equipment, but later on the issue was no longer existent, and they also expressed satisfaction with the access to information. If we take a look at the specifics of individual groups, in the residents, socialization with family members in the open area, this was lacking. The managers were very critical to the access of protective equipment, and they noticed that the number of physiotherapies and working therapies had declined, and half of managers expressed that this is an issue, and employees stated the same. So the first analysis of data show that the social and emotional aspect of the epidemic was very significant. It is usually less seen, but it very much influenced the quality of life of people staying in elderly homes. It is very difficult to hear these opinions in the public because this population has a very much less access to the media or to means of getting their opinion out. And we also have to say that this is a very similar group, and they are very different. They see life very differently. They are in very different stages, in various different stages in their life. So we mustn't generalize. But anyway, we have to say that with the exception of non-governmental organizations, which have become an advocate of them, and they bring out the messages of people staying in elderly home, but we are talking about a group of people without a voice, and this is why other organizations, other parts of the society have to talk about the experiences of people in elderly homes. If they are unable to put their experiences into words, maybe not comprehensively, or not, or maybe not enough, not interesting enough for the media. Are you involved in the adoption of measures of how the elderly are treated? Were you included by the government or by the ministry so that you could advise them on how to better implement certain measures? Our institution cooperates with the government through standard pathways. So when we stated or gave the evaluation regarding the discrimination of movement, and I have to say we were heard in that matter, but during the third Coronavirus Act, to each proposal we give proposals on how to improve it in regards to discrimination, reduction of discrimination, and so on. Certain proposals were taken into account, certain weren't, but it was taken into, our proposals were taken into, our proposals regarding the increase of the financial funds for were in the budget were taken into account in the fourth Coronavirus Act. And on the other hand, now we also gave the opinion on the Long-Term Care Act, and what we are missing in the act is that this act should be based on the right to a long-term living. It should be based on it, and it should have a clear principle of a good access for everyone, irrespective of their personal circumstances. And based on the Protection Against Discrimination Act, this is a fundamental right, and we have enough legal basis so that we can continue in this direction, despite, in addition to other personal circumstances of individuals. So in this way, we can contribute to such proceedings. Ms. Biserka Marut Medin, if we try to rise above the current situation, we saw that there were certain issues which the elders have. So the fact that they are not listened to, and we also heard a lot about discrimination. Hans Wimberg also talked about values, which should be more heard and further taken into account. So you are on the first line of defense of the rights for a better, more humane situation of the elders in the society. Do you see any differences in the attitude towards elders in the past and today? So depends on what you define as in the past. If I took it my young age, when I was young, so there was a lot more respect towards senior citizens. We took their opinion more into account in making decisions. But if we take a look at the last years, when we had the economic crisis in 2009, and the epidemics, it's increasing the situation. We see that in various areas, the older people are not needed anymore. We are not involved. We are not used. Our potential is not used. We still have potential. So we are not used anymore. You said that we are on the first line of defense. We do not want to be the ones criticizing. We offer concrete solutions, but if there is no response from decision makers, it's difficult to make a difference. But I have to say that there is a lot of trust among older people, and they turn to the Silver Thread. This is our organization. And we saw that the poor situation regarding the senior care is due to the fact that the care is divided among two ministries and they keep swapping the responsibility. And this was very popular today, in these days, when it was expected or demanded from the elderly homes that they organize gray zones, and in cases of infection, red zones. Nobody asked what are the options of the possibilities of elderly homes. How many people can be in the gray zone? How many people can be in the red zone? In July, based on the elderly home Hrastnik, where there was a lot of infections, we saw that this was not feasible. The elderly homes warned them of that, and the Silver Thread warned them as well. The ministries did not do anything and did not ensure external capacities which could ensure that the infected persons could move out of the elderly homes and which would prevent the spread of the virus. So in the last 2 weeks we saw that everybody is talking about the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Labor, so that managers of elderly homes have to take care of that. But I don't know then why we have the ministries which actually should organize such centers where we could move the ill and infected patients. And well, now they're placed into gymnasiums. And I listened to the minister at 5 p.m. and they said that this is an example of a good practice. I have to disagree. This is definitely not an example of good practice. I would like to applaud to the director who had to find her own solution, and she found the solution in the gymnasium. But this is not a solution for senior citizens, and this shows the attitude towards senior citizens because everything is good enough for them. A doctor in the Tarcha magazine said that they perhaps have 1 year or 2 years of life remaining. It doesn't matter if they die because of lack of space in the hospital. Every citizen of the Republic of Slovenia, we all need equal opportunity of access to medical care, irrespective of when we were born and irrespective of where we come from the elderly home or from a beautiful mansion. So European funds were available. They were available in March to resolve issues in regards to epidemics. We always asked questions, how many COVID hospitals will you set up? We asked them in April because we knew that in autumn and in winter the situation will be negative. How many care hospitals? And then we read how the Ministry of Law said that they are building a prison in Dobrunia from these funds. And then we ask ourselves how the two ministers who are responsible for the elderly, how they take care of this sector. Is it a priority or isn't it? This is why we say that we need a ministry for the elderly. Well, I mentioned beforehand the first line of defense. I did not want to criticize you. I just wanted to say that you strive to notify the public and that you want to emphasize the necessity of dignified aging. What is the public not aware of? What do you have to talk about the most? The politicians do not know that they will also be one of the older population. We all are getting older, so we cannot postpone this issue. I have to say that among the senior citizens and the facilitators, there are no conflicts or discussions that this should not be done. We all agree that this should be done. The facilitators work hard in this area, but we are unable to continue. We need systemic differences, the systemic changes, but there are no changes. And the 31 million, Mr. Lobnik, I'm getting goosebumps, and I might get COVID as well when I hear that 31 million was used for new staff in elderly homes, but only 26 for 103 elderly homes. So you need care 24/7. This means that this is one employee 24/7 in the elderly home. This is not enough. We have to be thankful for everything, but so that in every public appearance the minister praises himself with such poor facts, I get embarrassed. When I hear all of you through this prism of human rights and senior citizens, one point is that is the social distancing, and the second point on how the system is not adapted to the current situation. Jakub Bizek, the system of care for the elderly was manufactured in a different time, in different conditions, in different demographic situation as well, which was very much different than what we have today. And you are on the front line as well, and the long-term care for the elderly is difficult as well because the elderly homes are turning into care facilities, and it seems that this is a serious issue. It is a problem, isn't it? So
first of all, every long-term care has been introduced because the number of elderly has grown, and they have been relocated from hospitals to suitable institutions. In Slovenia, the financial contribution of the residents is very high concerning the other EU member states, and that the residents and their family have to put up with all the costs is very well serving the state, I have to say. On the other hand, we get to hear that we are not the healthcare, but then they expect of the retirement homes to treat COVID-infected people. So when we need more staff, we get called healthcare institution and so on. So it's very confusing, everything. At one point, we've been distributed oxygen facility. So the situation, I have to say, is like it is because the state doesn't show enough interest in us. And until, especially the relatives, the family doesn't revolt against that, we won't change anything, I have to say. So, in some cases, we found that the relatives have not objected to their situation. The people have given up because the system is as it is. However, we see today that everything is changing. The health situation is getting worse of our resident, the one of our residents. The Ministry of Health, however, is not helping us in this respect. They're just increasing the norms which we cannot put up with. So the coverage of the national healthcare security is also not as it should be. So, in your opinion, what should we do to change the current situation? Is the only thing that we need more money? Well, in this field, the staff costs are the highest, I have to say. So, for example, 60 euro is covered by the national health insurance, and from this 60 euro, maybe 45 euro are labor costs. And everything depends on that. The fact is, however, that we need to present the results of this pilot study to see what the residents really need and what this means in terms of time, and to put this into concrete numbers. So this is how it works in Slovenia. First, we make some calculations, put it into an Excel table, and then we see, oh, that's too high, we cannot put up with these costs. Then we reduce the number by half. However, we know it's not sufficient. And of course, then we get an act on long-term elderly care that is not sufficient, doesn't answer the needs of the elderly, really. Have I seen right, Ms. Marl, to have a comment? Yes, I wanted to say that we need today a very good act on long-term elderly care, not one that is being discussed now this month. We've been included, we've given lots of constructive comments, but now we haven't had any answers, any activities from the activity. We have no idea what's happening with this draft of the act. As far as the pilot project goes, I think it's very good that the activities are presented, and the project has actually shown what the needs are of the elderly. Today, we need also home care, especially now in the times of the pandemic. This home care, home help is a system that is, I have to say, also not sufficient enough. However, the needs are rising today. We all know that the pensions are not high, and if we want the welfare state to be enforced, we need to take care of the elderly as well. And I am addressing Mr. Ziegler-Kral, the minister, in this respect. So which retirement homes they will build in the next years, as they have promised. It's not as he said and we also need the new healthcare insurance, social care, and we need to reshape the additional healthcare insurance for the elderly and others. Thank you very much. Now we will give the floor to Mr. Winberg.
I would like to end these debates on a more positive note. Medical and digital revolutions brought many changes to our society. Where do you see best practice examples when talking about care for the elderly, and where do you think we should go in the future? What would you recommend when they, I don't know, hire you to advise them? What is that you tell them is the best way forward?
Well, the best way forward, I'm not very much for best ways, because you need to take into account the actual context you have. But I think that the solution that we have gone for with home care and home service has been rather successful, because and you shouldn't get stuck in that. But most of the people actually wants to stay home, and then if you can help them in the home. It is much better. But what we have failed as of yet is to get the medical support as well as the social care support into their homes. And there I think that especially now during COVID-19, the number of digital visits and interactions through phone or some digital channel has actually become much better. Because if you have staff coming into the home, they can assist with both making the contacts and connections, but they can also assist with some kind of simpler diagnostics and using equipment that you have. And I think that's rather cost effective, because then you don't have to build a lot of houses. But then this doesn't fit for everyone. So there will always be a part of the population that actually needs to be taken into a care home or something like that. But then you should make them more home-like. But to have I think services, and I think that digitalization is going to play a very big role here, because it's much easier if you can visit in people's homes than if you like we have night cameras and things like that so that the teams doesn't have to go into the home in the middle of night waking someone up. But if you wake up and want to say something, you can just wave to the camera, and then you can speak with someone immediately, because you have a person monitoring them. And then so I think that there are lots of things, and I think that we need really to think about technology here. And it's very easy and rather cheap technology that we need, but we just need to use it, and we need to learn how to communicate with the different parts that we need. I think that's very important, to have a relational service for these target groups.
Thank you. A
while ago, I read somewhere that Slovenia gives approximately 0.8% for senior citizens. It was compared to Austria, where they give 1.2% of GDP for senior citizens. The percentage is higher in the north, and the aging is better as well there. Jaka Bizjak. Will we as a society have to make the decision if we want to age as the developed countries of Northern Europe, or if we want to go closer to Southern or Eastern Europe, where a lot of costs and responsibility is given to family members or to voluntary organizations, and what we have to do to ensure that things move forward. I have to say that I think that we give less than 0.8% of GDP. I did a research a while ago, and I saw that things are reported in the 0.8% that are not related to this. I think there's healthcare at home as well included, and a lot of things which should not have been included in this percentage. And this only raises the percentage, and nobody was able to explain to me why this was the fact. So we have to make the decision. So we are on the line between the northern Protestant and the southern Catholic line, and we are closer to the south, and it is difficult to accept for some people. And I think that relatives should demand, but not only relatives, but everybody will need it in 10 or 15 years. We should demand clear answers from decision makers. Do we have to do it ourselves? Should we start making the plan on how we will sell our house and other things? Can we expect anything? Or do we have to take care of ourselves? And we should demand honesty from them, so that they will tell us what will happen, what won't happen. At the moment, we have a situation that they like to take photos and various openings of various facilities, but when they have to open their wallet, they all disappear. And if we start asking them what will happen, is it going to happen, I think that this could make a change. Ms. Biserka Maralt Medin, I read somewhere, and I quote you, on what has to be changed. We have to talk less and make less promises, and do more. We need more understanding, more mutual help, and we have to look with our hearts. Do you agree with this, with your own quote? Yes, I am an advocate of the long-term care. I do not ask what they will give me. I demand from them. Older people have done a lot for the society. We have a lot of achievements which we have in Slovenia or Yugoslavia in the past, and I believe that older people deserve dignified aging because we've worked for it. We will not ask, but we will demand. And if you see in the background, so this is my studio in my living room. So we demand the law on long-term care, and we do not want to live in containers, in gymnasiums, in schools, but we want to be treated equally as all citizens of the Republic of Slovenia. Thank you. And Mr. Miha Lobnik, advocate of the principle of equality, you will have the last word. I think that the first thing that you've done was that you've initiated the procedure or the lawsuit due to discrimination on the grounds of old age. This was on the basis of the Society of Cycling Judges of Slovenia. One of the judges was unable to participate in judging due to his age, or to participate in competitions. According to the UNO information, Slovenia is one of the countries where the society ages the quickest. We can expect, because the share of older people is rising, we can expect that there will be more discrimination against older people. What is your action plan for the future? How to fight against these issues? First of all, I would like to say that what Biserka Marot Medin does is honorable. She is a voice for older people. She fulfills the principle and she actively participates. And this topic should not only be given to political parties, so she depolitizes the topic and ensures an intergenerational dialogue, which is always important for discussion. And we as an institute can invite everyone who is facing discrimination to turn to us. So in their daily lives, we can ask individuals to turn to us for advice. They can give us a call, they can send us an email, and we will give them assistance. Our consultants will tell them if they should use legal paths, and they will explain to them if there is legislation which protects them in their individual cases. And with individual cases of individuals, we persist in our own rights, and we will continue to monitor the proposals for acts to ensure that these questions in the acts are opened. So we have a Personal Assistance Act, which is open until the age of 65. This is another administrative prohibition, so that personal assistance it actually means that people over the age of 65 are no longer active, and that they do not deal with these questions, but they only want to bring it to one point. This is the age of 65. So our judicial case is also very, very symbolic. The gentleman performed the work of a cycling judge for many years. For this line of work, he doesn't have to cycle with quick cyclists. He can do it from a moving vehicle. So when he was 70 years old, according to rules of the association, he was unable to continue working as a judge, but there were no objective tests. When the age is the limiting factor, the age cannot be an exclusive factor, but the ability to perform a certain type of work should be the limiting factor. So this was a case of discrimination, which was from the document of human rights. So we should not look at people through a narrow prism of individual characteristics, and we should not categorize them on how do we treat them in the practice or on the basis of the system, which we reduce to one circumstance. In this case, this was age. So this is one of the messages of our association, our institute, which will continue to act on all levels where we have jurisdiction. We cooperate with non-governmental organizations, and we will continue to work in this direction. Thank you very much. Before I thank all of you for your participation, does anyone want to make a comment? Do you want to add something? I know that there's a lot left to be said. I don't know, that we are dealing with a very complex question. We have been dealing with this for decades, and I hope we'll continue to do so in the future. Does anyone want to have something to add? I have to say that this is a question of political priorities. We have to make decisions. So we invest into banks, planes, similar toys, or will we ensure the care of our senior citizens? So we haven't talked about this in the past. Biserka, you had something to add. Thank you for opening this important question and the fact that this is being discussed. I think that it's important that we raise awareness among the people who make decisions. I would like to thank everyone who work in this area. I would also like to thank the advocate, because he responds to our demands. And this is why we also state that we need an ombudsman for senior citizens. Hans, you wanted to add something?
Yep. Yes. Yeah. I would just like to say that it's always hard as a Swede to talk about the elderly and how we take care of them, because we have a rather long tradition of having elderly homes and helping people. But I think that what you can learn from Sweden, well, first of all, 0.8 is probably too low a number if you want to do anything substantial. We put almost as much into the care part of the system as we do in healthcare. So it's more like 5-6% of the GDP that goes into different care services. But I think that we struggle all the time, and especially the politicians are really afraid that the cost should escalate too much. But I think that there are actually better methods today, that we can do more with less resources. And one of the things we have to do is to use the resources that the elderly actually have, because we're not talking a different kind of species here. We're talking about experienced and very mature people in society. So they can do much more, but they need assistance in ways that they can sort of get the help. And I think that it's not just in Sweden, it's definitely not a question about resources anymore. It's about how we use them and not wasting them.
Hans Wimberg, thank you very much for being part of our debate, our conference. So thank you for your contribution. Tudi gospoda sogovornika in sogovornica, tudi vam najlepša hvala.
I would also like to thank other participants for your good input and your experience in this area. I would like to thank everyone for your participation. You've listened to the discussion Human Rights and Senior Citizens, part of the international project Human Rights into the 21st Century, organized by the European Liberal Forum with the Institute Novum. This was all for today. With new discussions, we will continue very soon. And if you require more information, I advise you that you visit our website, humanrights21.eu. Thank you very much and have a pleasant evening.